In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
We bless you, Lord. We praise you for your gift of life and the wonderful opportunity that we have to live life in your presence. We ask you to guide us today in your loving care so that we can grow in our understanding of the Scriptures and our knowledge and our love of Christ. Let these words really help us to conform our lives to what is true and what is good and the purposes that you have for us. And we ask these things through Jesus, our brother and our Lord, who lives and reigns forever and ever. Amen. God bless the Holy Land. Amen. Oh, yes, God bless Lewiston, Maine, and all the difficulties that are going on.
And the entire universe. Everything on the universe and everywhere.
Everything on the universe. Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me. Oh, she's welcoming him. All right, let's take a look at chapter 22. And we're in the last section of chapter 22. So what we've been dealing with over the last few weeks is the continual conflicts between Jesus and his adversaries, the powers that be behind the religious authorities of Jerusalem. Now, remember that, just for your edification, remember that Matthew is writing sometime maybe 10 to 15 years after the fall of Jerusalem. Okay? And what does that mean? The destruction of the temple happened, the fall of Jerusalem happened, and what did that mean for the leadership of Israel? Do you know? What happened to the leadership of Israel?
They no longer have what they normally do, going to the temple, offering sacrifices, all that's taken away from them.
Okay, good. So if all that is taken away from them, where are the Sadducees and the chief priests and the elders of the people? Are they still a force that is opposed to Christianity, or what's going on here in the history? Well, first of all, we've got to understand that once the temple has ended and the worship at the temple has ended, what happens to the people who used to be in charge and who used to be active in terms of organizing the 1,000 some odd employees of the temple complex? They had to go on unemployment, right? So there was no sacrificial priesthood anymore. There was no high priesthood anymore. There was no temple cult. There was no Sadducees. There was this war between the Romans and the Jews decimated, not decimated, but at least scattered and sort of kind of recreated the leadership of Jerusalem and its people, because the authority of the temple and all of its officers was gone. Who stepped in? Who stepped in to lead the Jewish people after the temple was destroyed and the priesthood and all that was gone? Who stepped in?
Pharisees.
The Pharisees did, yes. Very good. And this is what is the authority that Jesus really conflicts with in the Gospel of Matthew, because in Matthew's time, the Pharisees are the leadership group that has caused the greatest difficulties for the Christian community. because the priesthood was gone when Matthew is writing. He's writing about conflict between Christians and Jews, and in the context that he's living, the power behind the Jewish authority are the Pharisees. So this was not the case during Jesus' lifetime. The Pharisees were not the organized adversaries that they turn out to be later on under Matthew. Got that? Okay, that's pretty important. All right, that means that as Jesus is encountering the various groups, the Pharisees don't emerge as the major opponent to Jesus except in the Gospel of Matthew. And that is because in Matthew's community, Phariseeism is still around, and Pharisee is still important. And so the Pharisees embody an opposing group to the Christian community. All right. So now that you're here, all right, let's take a gander at this story. Verse 34 in Matthew 22. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they came together. I thought that was rather significant. They came together to create a force, an opposition force. Because remember, the Pharisees were not a group. They were not a group. They were individuals who were striving to live the law and to live holiness. They were a group of laymen, not a religious authority. Okay. Anyway, got lost. They silenced the Sadducees. They came together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the great, and I don't know how your translation says this, which is the great commandment in the law? Do you have that?
Which commandment is the greatest?
Which commandment is the greatest? Okay. Okay. And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. Okay, real short little pericope today. You know what a pericope is? It's what we just read.
Okay.
That's a pericope.
Where'd that word come from, do you know?
It comes from the Greek.
Okay, all right. So it's
All
not,
right.
it's not English then? No?
Well, it's English now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. All right. So what initial questions might you have about this passage? Any initial questions? Or is it so self-evident that there are no questions and we can just skip it?
Do you see Jesus here really focusing principally on the Ten Commandments and not the ritual and the dietary code and circumcision?
He's not even concentrating on the Ten Commandments.
You don't think he's even referring to
No. Mm-mm. But go on with your question.
Well, I mean, the Ten Commandments in effect say what he is saying. I mean, if you love your neighbor, you don't sleep with his wife.
Right.
You know, you don't steal. I mean, all of those things are expressions of what the great commandment of love of God and love of neighbor mean.
Absolutely. And so
Much more succinct than you find
Yeah.
in the Mosaic law,
Uh-huh.
Levitical code.
yeah. Mm-hmm. So how many laws are there again?
613.
Oh, yeah.
613. Very good. Whoever said that.
Yeah. Diane said it.
All right, we'll give her the credit today. there are 613 laws which
Come in.
which comprise. Uh-huh. We used to be 10, 15. This was the first week we started at 10.
We didn't get the memo.
I sent an email.
Okay, so 613 laws, how many of them are positive and how many of them are negative?
Most of them.
Most of them. Most of them are negative, but there is a specific number. There are 248 positive and 365, one for each day of the year, negative. Okay? So, these laws were anything from finding the nest of a sparrow and what to do with it if there was still a bird in it, to worship. And the way these were evaluated, they used the term light and heavy. Okay? So there were certain laws that were light, that didn't have the same importance or same regulation type of life that some did, and those heavier had more. We have more an obligation to be faithful to. So, light and heavy, positive and negative, and in there are the 10 Commandments. All right, and in there is this commandment. And in there is the love of neighbor as oneself. So if you look at all the laws, they're there, all the laws, and somehow comprised by these 613. And what was going on in the culture at the time was continual discernment about which laws were most binding, which laws demanded the most from the faithful person, because some laws were not as critical as others. But what was the most critical, the most important of all the laws? Was it love God? Or was it thou shalt not have strange gods before me? Was it thou shalt not kill? I mean, where were general people in terms of the severity of the law? So this was a common argument, a common discussion among lawyers, Pharisees, and so on and so forth, leaders of the Jews, because they wanted to sift through and find out what's the one or what's the several that sum up everything. So, yes.
Is there like a hierarchy, either in Jesus' time or later, that kind of said this law's most important?
This is it. Today, what we just heard. That's the hierarchy. You want to know?
Hierarchy.
That's the hierarchy. So, what are the most important? These two. Yeah?
But who, I mean, like in a person, like a pope. That kind of hierarchy.
What laws did the Pope have to follow?
Did the teachers have a hierarchy?
Did the teachers themselves have a hierarchy? Not that I know of, I suppose if the chief priest said it, you'd be pretty attentive to it, but it's not like papal infallibility,
Is that kind of like the big T for tradition and the little t?
Yeah, it could be regarded as similar to that. Yeah, what binds us? What is less binding?
And what about like mortal and venial sins for us? Isn't there, mortal carry more weight and venial are like.
Mortal will send you right to hell.
Is that true, is that still a Catholic?
Yeah, that's Catholic teaching.
Okay.
Yeah. And venial means, well, God could probably forgive it. Somebody else. Yeah.
So, here, there's 3 different means by which to love the Lord: heart, soul, mind. Do you think there's an order at all to any of them? And do you think that women connect with one first and then the other fall in versus men? I'm thinking women are often more heart-centered.
Uh-huh.
And then the rest kind of follows.
Uh-huh.
Yesterday I started thinking maybe men are a little bit more mind-centered and then the heart follows. So I'm wondering if you could speak to the 3 ways are mentioned.
No, I can't.
The Lord.
The reason I can't is because I want you to discuss it at your table first.
Okay.
Yeah. That's how it goes. All right?
What was the source of all 613? Do we believe that those were actually handed from God to Moses?
Well, yeah. Okay, so what it is basically God teaching Moses in through the 40 days that he's on the top of Mount Sinai conversing with God. He's learning what God requires. He comes down, and he promulgates the law to the people, and they write down what God wants of them. So that's essentially how we understand this in the big sense. How it actually evolved is a little bit obscure. Okay?
In the last line, could you expand on what does it mean that the prophets depend on those 2 commandments?
Okay.
I can understand
Later.
the whole law
Later.
later.
Remind me again. Okay. What I'd like you to do now is to compare this with Mark and Luke. Okay? So you can find the same story in Luke chapter 10, verse 25 and following. And then in Mark, you can find it at Mark 12, 18 to 27. Okay, so here's what we know. We know that this story circulated as something that all 3 synoptic gospels have. John's gospel, of course, does not have it because he's not following the same pattern. But Matthew, Mark, and Luke are following the same pattern, and so they all have this same story. So let's look at it together. Let's look at Luke chapter 10. It's easier that way. And behold, a lawyer stood up and put him to the test. All right, the first thing we want to recognize, folks, is that this takes place much earlier in Luke's gospel than it does in Matthew's gospel. So remember, the last part of the gospel, Jesus is in Jerusalem contending with the authorities in Jerusalem right before his crucifixion. This is in the 10th chapter of Luke's gospel, which means Luke has inserted this story much, much earlier in the controversies that envelop Jesus. Okay? Now, when it says a lawyer stood up, do you have that?
A scholar.
A scholar of the law stood up. What does that imply to you?
He's speaking with authority.
He's what?
Speaking with authority.
He's speaking with authority, but I'm more interested in the context.
Jesus is teaching.
Jesus is in a context of teaching, and when one stands, one does not assume authority, but one assumes humility before the one seated and offers his question, or so on and so forth. So, remember, being seated is the position of authority. Okay? Being seated. All right, so he stands up and he says, "What shall I do to inherit eternal life?" Now, all of a sudden, the concept that Matthew and Mark have, which is what is the greatest commandment of the law, has been switched. And now it is, what must I do to inherit eternal life? You see that? Okay. So this now becomes a personal question about his own working toward his life, his eternal life. He said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" Now here's what the lawyer does. "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." Now, what Jesus does in Matthew and Mark is he puts the command from Deuteronomy and the command from Leviticus together. Here, the lawyer does it.
Oh.
The lawyer does it. He puts the two together. And so Jesus says, well, it's great. You got it. Now, what we're learning from this, or what we can surmise from this, is that this combination of these two commandments existed. And Jesus is not inventing something new. Which is what I hear so often from so many priests. Well, the amazing thing is that Jesus put these two together. No. He's not the first to do it. Okay? It's been done. So there is something a little bit, unoriginal about Jesus in this, and that he is talking about the culture, the things that Pharisees talk about, the things that scribes talk about. This is something that we have commonly looked at, understood, and valued. This is something that we've all shared in at some level. So when Jesus recognizes that this young man has the same basic concept of life, he affirms him and says, you're not far. Let's look at Mark's version now in chapter 12.
A question.
Yeah.
If that were so, that those two already existed, then why was there still a big debate about what was the greatest?
Because it really wasn't a debate about the greatest. It was, tell me how erudite you are. Tell me how clever you are. Show me some sign of the core of your teaching. So there were probably other iterations, but this is one that exists. Now, there's a rabbi by the name of Hillel who is active in the time of Jesus, and he said, basically, if you could sum up the whole law, was to love God. For all the rest of the laws are commentary. Love God and love your neighbor. The rest is commentary, he said. So he had an opinion similar. Okay? All right, let's look at Mark 12. And it's the fourth conflict, so it's verse 23. Now, remember that Matthew and Mark are much, much closer aligned than, let's say, Luke is with Matthew and Mark, although there's a certain alignment already. But here, Matthew and Mark both have these conflict series going on right before Jesus' death. So Luke has moved it way earlier, Mark has put it in the conflict section of the gospel right before Jesus' death, his conflict with official Judaism. So here, it's very different again. One of the scribes came up, heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that he answered them well, that Jesus answered them well, asked, which commandment is the first of all? A slightly different way of phrasing the question, okay? First, not the greatest, the first, okay? What demands our allegiance first? Jesus answered, the first is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no greater commandment than these. Now, this is where it gets really strange, because here, in a conflict story, you have Jesus admiring the lawyer who admires what he has to offer. So the conflict is really not a conflict, because this lawyer understands. So the scribe said to him, you're right, teacher. You've truly said that he is one, there is no other but he, and to love him with all our heart, with all our understanding, with all our strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself is worth much more than whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. And Jesus saw that he answered wisely, and he said, you are not far from the kingdom of God. So, 3 different versions of the same story. How do we get to what is core and central to our understanding of what we believe, what we hold to be true? And so in 2 contexts, in Luke and in Matthew, they're adversarial. In Mark's gospel, it's not a controversy or an adversarial relationship, but instead Jesus commends.
I don't have Luke in front of me, but it doesn't Luke add the lawyer saying, but then who is my neighbor?
That's a different passage.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it follows.
Yeah, that follows on the Good Samaritan. Yeah. All right. We good with the 3 comparisons? All right. Let's take a look at what is Jesus doing here in this particular passage. And why is this so clever? First of all, remember that Jesus is a Jew and that the Jews have a central command that is from Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 and 5. So if you would turn to your Bible and go to chapters 6 in Deuteronomy, verses 4 and 5, you will find Shema Yisrael.
Whatever that means.
Shema Yisrael. Adonai Eloheinu. Adonai Echad. You all need to memorize that.
That's awesome.
You are spiritually a Jew. Pope Pius XII said that. We are all spiritual Semites, he said. So you better learn the Jewish. No, you're not even Italian. You're Sicilian. All right. Deuteronomy 6, are you all there? All right. This is called the Shema. And this is what Jesus is quoting here. It begins Shema Yisrael. But the word is, if you just use the word, it's called the Shema. Shema.
Shema.
But it's pronounced in the prayer, Shema.
Shema.
Okay? And it means hear. Okay? So hear, O Israel.
Here, H-E-A-R.
H-E-A-R. Hear. Yeah. In other words, open your ears. Listen. Stop being Sicilian. The Lord our God is Lord alone. Adonai Eloheinu. Say it. Adonai Eloheinu.
I didn't know what that meant now, do I?
Adonai is the Hebrew word for Lord. Okay? Adonai Echad. Okay? The Lord is Lord alone. Okay? All right. So then it goes on. You shall love the Lord your God, etc., etc., etc. So when Jesus is announcing he says, what is the most important law? Well, it's the Shema. Shema. It's the Shema. Well, this is the core and center of the law of Israel. Jesus shows himself to be a great, solid Jewish boy or man. Okay? Of course this is it. This is central. Then he adds to it a command from Leviticus chapter 19. So let's go there. And you want to look at verse 18.
What chapter?
19.
Chapter 19, verse 18. Now, Leviticus is a book of laws, and it's a book of laws that pertains to secular life and society, especially in this section, where the authors of Leviticus want to impress upon the community, how do we live with each other? It's hard. What do we need to do to live with each other? Okay, this is what you need to do. Don't steal somebody else's husband. Don't steal somebody else's wife. Don't do this. Don't do that. You shall not do this. You shall not do that. This is the law of Leviticus. So we come to this point where it says, take no revenge and cherish no grudge against your own people. All right. First of all, the context is not the world. It's your own people. Okay? If that's the context, the second part of it goes with it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. All right, that's where Luke gets into the question of, well, who's my neighbor? And how does that work? You know? Of course, in the law of Moses in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, it suggests that your neighbor is your fellow Jew. But when we get to Jesus, and the question becomes, and who is my neighbor? I mean, we decided long ago that it was our fellow Jews that we owed this kind of responsibility to. But now it seems that this is becoming a more challenging concept for the Israelites. It's not neighbor. It's maybe broader than that. And so when he asks the question, who is my neighbor, that's a really genuine question on the part of the lawyers, on his part. So when Jesus answers and says, who is the neighbor to the man who fell among robbers? Who is the neighbor? Well, then you be the neighbor. So it's not about who out there is my neighbor. It's like, I'm the neighbor, and I've got to care for everyone, because that's my job as one who follows the law. Okay, but I wanted to introduce to you this concept of Leviticus, which really is about what happens in and among us and how we're supposed to care for each other and love one another and love our neighbor. Question, of course, is, who's my neighbor? All right. You got the origin of Jesus' response here. Okay. Once again, it doesn't necessarily mean that Jesus is unique in this. It means that he is faithful to a tradition that is already apparently in the culture. But it's not universal, which means that there can still be argument among the lawyers. But here's a beautiful example of somebody who trusts Jesus enough, in these other contexts, trusts Jesus enough to ask sincerely. But what Matthew does is he sets it up as a challenge. Okay? I want to know where your theology is. That's what the lawyers are asking, or the Pharisees are asking. Okay? All right, let's go back to Matthew. Now here's my question for your table discussion this morning. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and with all your mind. What does that mean? How do we love God? What do we do to love God? What is it that we're supposed to be acting on? How do we love God? God is a spirit. He's not like next to you right on the ground like your puppy. How do you love a spirit? What do we do that manifests our love for God? Clear? Go. Have a brilliant conversation.
My friend Bill.
Hello, how are you?
I think it means love with your brain.
Don't tell me.
100%.
Tell your group.
Yeah.
We think about what it means. How you apply it. We think about how you relate
The other part of this
to other people.
that I was going to ask you about is it actually goes on to talk about loving like your neighbors. It's like the broadest concept because if you hate your enemies, still love everyone, even those who persecute you, even those who are against you.
And so to become more like God, we have to be able to do that. So it's just.
And that was kind of my question, what he was just talking about with Leviticus, was the idea of Deuteronomy as well. That there it seemed like it was within the Jewish community, and with Jesus, it's everybody.
And he's saying love the Lord your God, and he is God. So he's saying these things, and he is saying how mind-blowing it is for them, the Jews. Look at us as the first chosen people. Inside the company, you can't be because you are not following Go away from those cut and dry laws and say,
No, the thing is, we don't really do that. We have to try to
he's making me.
convince them.
I mean, it just makes me think, would you do that today?
And they, all of that consumes a lot of
Coming
energy.
to Jesus Christ, because he's not following
The real focus of following the spirituality is something that
With the perspective of over 2,000 years later. But if you put yourself in that time, even if they heard this, I would imagine, just like today, you interpret it in a way favorable to the way you're living. You try to affirm, hey, I'm not so bad. I'm doing I'm not perfect. I'm doing okay. I don't know that they would
understand that.
understand or
centuries.
Accept that.
But in today's world, what's going on in the Middle East?
And the famous courtesan, gorgeous woman coming by
Both sides of it.
all of the bishops, as soon as they saw her, turned their eyes away. He looked at her,
Some say it's a part of evolution that it was always some version of us versus them. It's a way to survive. Those, your tribe, the other guys might have been dangerous. They might have been
Well, and maybe
gonna take you out.
God purposed it for at that time, so that they would stay whole and together, because Messiah had to come from this ancient tribe. So, yeah, we have that with us.
in our own lives.
Exactly what God did.
What was the hero of the story? He was Samaritan guys. So the enemy.
But these guys still, it's nice.
So he uses even a harlot as an example
Especially if they thought,
of what it means to
doing well,
love God.
following me, I'm kind of good in where I'm at. I don't want
That is, that's blows.
I've just learned the 613.
And now you're saying,
Dang it.
I'm
Just
good.
memorized all 600.
I think it's Bishop knows.
So if this is about becoming closer to God or like God,
Oh, there's nothing to be in
you know, like why would he say, like, your heart, your soul,
Nothing more needs to be said. That's like.
Everything.
What's that about?
Everything, just everything.
Not your.
Which means even giving up your intellectual. This is the way it's done. I'm following the rules.
You know, I think about
It's
that,
saying,
you know,
I
when we
want to
look
talk
at the
about that.
shadows of our culture.
Hold on to
anyway,
what
it is shallow.
trust.
But I look at what Catholics do
They didn't see
to succeed
Jesus
in
as Lord.
competition.
They saw him as.
Their complete dedication, the discipline, the hours of training
Just
they
say,
get into.
turn your life over to God. All of you. Just turn it all over.
And they do that.
Not even close.
Nobody does. I mean, really, it's you get it. This is what it is.
Your
I'm
own
right.
little corner of your mind. Just
Yeah, your
sometimes,
control, all that stuff.
so this is in your mind a fancier version of dying to self?
Yes.
It's the ultimate simplification.
Pushing it down, physically down, yeah. But isn't that what we're called to in our life of faith? So that's an example, yeah. That we should be looking at in our own faith.
Killing someone is a mortal sin.
I'm very thoughtful, but it's a good reminder, you know. And it gives me courage to at least a little more.
great meeting, there's a
Serious. It's hard to
Well, I miss it when I don't get to come. I just have a very crazy physical. I thought I was gonna retire.
be nine. And some of these is just a matter of extent or it's more subjective. But the concept was you best get to confession. Venial sins were common things. I continually speak, just an example.
But do you think that
I snapped at my wife or my spouse, something like that. Little, well, like.
That's a big.
Okay, I always thought it came from this, that the seven deadly sins.
I'll take whatever you got.
Sins come from that list in the Old Testament. Pride, greed, wrath, anger, murder, sloth. Or we don't have to accept that.
So you think about
understand
What do I need to be doing on a daily
in the
basis?
Old Testament. Yes,
It never stops.
yeah, scripture.
Okay, let's have a large group conversation and ask, who said no? Was that you, Donna?
That's why there's a Zinfandel.
I said, let's have a large group conversation, and I hear, no! All right. How do we love God? How do we love God?
By turning our life over.
I just can't resist intervening. It really seems to me very simple. We give all our heart, all our mind, all our feelings, day by day, with consistency, persistence, like an athlete training for a great competition. And that's what we fail to do. I want to tell a story from the Desert Fathers. This was from the 3rd century church about a Bishop Nonus who was sitting with a group of bishops by a major roadway. And as they were sitting there, the famous courtesan from the local city came by with all of her retinue. And the bishops all saw her and looked away, except for one, Bishop Nonus. And he turned and he looked at her, and then turned back to the other bishops and said, "Isn't she beautiful?" And they all groaned and looked away. And he looked back at her again, and he said, "Isn't she beautiful?" And they groaned and looked away. And then he said, "Look at what she does to make herself beautiful before men. Do we do anything like that to make ourselves beautiful before God?" That's what it means to love God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. To make ourselves beautiful before God. Yeah.
You don't mean
I
physically
mean,
beautiful.
in that sense,
No.
the athletes in our society are so much more exemplary than most Christians.
Yeah.
They pour themselves in incredible discipline and suffering and exertion to exceed. How many Christians do anything like that?
Yeah.
I don't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very true.
That story has stuck with me for 40 years.
That's a great story. Who else? Cindy.
I'm going to speak for Connie here, and if I misquote anything, please, correct me. But Connie was saying something that reminded me of what Bill just said. She said, when you put God first, and she said she had to really learn this a lot in her life, and the Franciscan friars helped her to do that, is to look to God above all things. And as you look and you reflect on God, you realize how beautiful a person you are, because God's love comes back to you and you begin to appreciate yourself. And once you do that, that love flows out to others, because you can see the beauty in the others around you. So it starts with God. And I think that's what they're saying, in the greatest of the commandments, you have to start there.
And that actually makes a cross. I'm very visual. So it's vertical first, God to us, and then it's horizontal, us to
Mhm.
others.
Mm-hmm.
And then with that, then the action follows. I can do the action and not have the love behind me, like
Yes.
paying my taxes. It's a law, I can try to do good by just going out and, giving somebody a meal. But if the love isn't there, the compassion isn't there, and it's dead, the acts are dead.
Yes, but I'd also like to offer the option of, or the possibility of, that acts of love can lead us to an attitude of love.
Yes.
If we commit ourselves to the way of loving, that eventually we'll come to that spiritual experience of what love is all about. So it's not necessarily that you have to do one before the other. It can be, I think, either way. I think sometimes, sometimes you just have to tell yourself, you're not feeling loving, but you do the loving thing because it's important and it matters to you. And after doing the loving thing, you begin to realize that you are a loving person,
Oh, I thank you for that, because I actually really needed to hear that today. And something you said, I really needed to hear today too, but, in my prayers, I've been praying for a specific person, and I thought really hard about the order of it. And I decided that the heart had to be softened before the heart could return to the Lord. Fear kind of came into my heart when you said, it's just empty.
Could you please talk a little louder?
Oh, I'm sorry. But then, but then hope came in that, maybe the act of love, even if God is not behind it, there's hope that, faith will follow.
Okay? Yeah?
Thank God.
Yes, Sabina.
Yes, sir. So what I heard not too long ago, this person said, love is not a feeling, it is a commitment, especially in a marriage. You have to commit yourself to love, because the feeling sometimes goes away, but if you make a commitment to love a person, you work on that, you commit again and again and again.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And that this kind of love that we're talking about, this kind of love that originates in God, is not about feelings. Feelings
come and go.
Yes, and they will always disappoint you. So, all right, what else? What else? How do we love God?
With all our heart, mind, soul.
What if I asked you what that means? How do you love God with all your soul or mind or whatever?
Part of it is really looking at him and then the desire to become like him.
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking when we were talking about sometimes we don't have the feeling behind something.
Right.
But we're still, if we're committed to, I always say for forgiving, because forgiving is a real good example. You may not feel like forgiving that person, but you know you need to. If you're going to be anything like Jesus, that's what he came here for, was to forgive our sins. So you forgive, and over time, as you continually forgive and keep on reminding yourself you have to forgive, eventually, forgiveness does a supernatural work of taking away the ugly.
You're absolutely
that
right.
Did not want to forgive. So
You're absolutely right.
even though you aren't feeling it yet, you still do it because you love him and he's forgiving.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. What else? Anything else that you do to love God? Like on a day-to-day basis, what would you do, let's say, today to love God? What will you do? Or what have you done? Or what do you think you should do?
I came to your Bible class.
That's perfectly fine. Cindy?
Well, I think prayer is high on the list. I think
Okay.
it's a very important part. But you look for those opportunities, and they're there when people come before you that need your help or situations arise. And that's when that you may not feel like doing it, but you go ahead and do it anyway.
Yeah.
And follow through on that commitment. But opportunities arise, and you need to be open to say yes.
There's a sense that, our willingness to put our trust in God's leadership has a very active character to it, It is to pray and to listen and then to follow through on what you're being guided in. And so that's love, It isn't this, pitter-patter of the heart. It's the hard work of manifesting that love in my life, and making myself an agent of God's love. Anyone else?
I'll play nice with my neighbor.
That's it? That's to love God is to play nice with your neighbor?
Yeah, you said.
You could be a fraud.
Could be one
You could.
thing.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll give it to you.
I was gonna say, for me, I have felt that the most essential thing for me is to ask, help me do your will this day.
Mm-hmm.
And trust, if he's listening, he's gonna make sure I find what I'm supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, trusting in that he will help me do
Mhm.
his will,
Mhm.
helps me become more conformed to his image.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I look at that as a simple start. For
Yeah. That's
Right.
great. That's great.
To listen and be open to what he wants us to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's in prayer.
Yeah. I think.
Are we listening?
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. If God is leading us in our lives, then to love Him means to listen to Him.
Mhm.
And listening is about obedience.
And the part about loving your neighbor as yourself is an attitude that you can portray to others, that you are there to be a servant. And you are there to help. You are there to be there for them.
I don't think it's something that you need to demonstrate or display. I think it's something that you need to know interiorly and to live interiorly. So if I help Bonnie, let's say, it's not necessary that she understands that I'm a servant and that I'm doing this for Christ. That's too much. She may never get there. But if she can understand that, or if I can understand that this is my role as a servant of Christ, then that's what's important. Dave, you're looking grave. Grave Dave. Let's take a break, okay? I have a little extra time today, so let's take a break.
Would you say that?
I finished your book, by the way.
Did you?
Yeah.
What'd you think?
I thought it was very reflective. It was hard for me,
I can only imagine.
but I thought it was very, very hopeful.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've read it twice just
Yeah.
because it's like one of those books that you get something more out of it when you think about it again.
Yeah.
And like I said, I was worried because it's easy when you're
Yeah.
intellectualized.
Yeah. I was telling Marie on the phone about it. I said, what it does is the hardest part of this whole process is the hospital. It's the hardest part, the medical professional, the medical maze, the medical attitude, and this whole
Rush you through.
Yeah, and you're just another one of my patients who has this disease, that kind of experience that you have in my office.
Yeah, and it's amazing when you find a doctor who you feels you
Yeah.
for the moment and is
Yeah.
not thinking of, you're one of a string.
Yeah.
In the love God is part of this embodied when you think of dying to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's sort of like an advanced stage. We
You
can't
don't
get
start there.
Yeah, you can't
Right, I
get there
got you.
immediately. It's only until you understand or have experienced the kind of love that God has for you that you can finally say, then I'm willing to die for
I
that.
think of John the Baptist often in the line of, I must decrease.
Well, you must increase. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you listened to the book. I'm really glad about that.
Yeah.
It turns out that it's one of my favorites from the last couple of years. And it's about courage, too.
Absolutely.
And for me, I read it, what would I be like? My sister died of a brain tumor earlier this year.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it was a glioblastoma.
Oh, yeah.
It was very fast advancing. And she wanted to see her grandchildren graduate from high school. And so she went through the surgery at Johns Hopkins, and they took out 3/4 of it. And the surgeon said it went really well. She was dead 4 months later.
Yeah, yeah. The same thing happened to my dad.
Really?
Both parents died of glioblastoma.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And my dad was diagnosed in November. He had surgery in December. He was dead in March.
Same. And my brother's a doctor, the youngest brother.
Yeah.
And he was with her. They were very close. And he was telling me, he said, I'm not sure. I'm not going to tell her what the right thing is, but
Yeah.
maybe you should enjoy your last months with the quality of life.
Yeah.
But she went for like, it was like she was doing it for others, not herself.
Yeah,
That, I did everything.
Yeah.
But it was
They're not going to blame me when I'm gone.
well, that's, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Stick with it.
All right. Lee,
Yes, sir.
what do you got to say for yourself?
The positive side, I work very hard to do the right things all the time and not make mistakes. And it works pretty well.
Pretty well?
Yeah.
Good.
I don't think anybody never makes a mistake. I mean, we all do from time to time. But we try hard not
It
to.
fell behind the thing, so I wasn't even.
I try as hard as possible not to make any mistakes, and I'm pretty good at it.
Yeah?
But I think everybody from time to time makes mistakes.
Yeah. Are you in a small group? Oh. How is that? Good? Cool. Jeff,
Yes, sir.
how's the choir?
Great.
Great?
It's been a great experience. I don't know if our performance is necessarily great, but I think we're all learning how to work together and sing together. It's been nice. Yeah, I enjoy it. It's a privilege.
Good, good. That's good to hear.
Yeah, Chris is a really awesome choir master. It's work, but he keeps it light, and we learn so much, I think, with every practice.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
I love it.
know he loves it. He loves directing that choir. I mean,
Oh, it's been
if he could do
so
that
much fun.
24 hours a day, I think he would.
Well, it's pretty cool. Like, I really enjoyed when we had the youth choir singing with us as well.
Yeah.
That we had like 17 people.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
It was great.
Yeah, those kids are.
Your sound was so good.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Just got to keep practicing.
Yeah. Always.
Yeah, and learn.
I used to hold it the longest.
I'm trying.
I used to the longest one.
We haven't done that in a while. We're going to do that pretty quick because of the Christmas season coming up, and we have to hold for those 16 beats for the what is that for? It's for the Alleluia choir that goes on and on and on. Got to be able to hold it, but it's wonderful.
All right. Once Sabina's stopped talking, we can begin again. We're going to look now at Exodus, okay? So, I want you to remember a little bit of the timeline in Exodus so that we have a good understanding of where we're at. So remember that the first part of Exodus is about Moses and his early life, his being found in the basket, and then his having killed an Egyptian. Do you remember this? Yes. Kills an Egyptian, has to run away to the land of Midian. Midian is right across and down. Let's see if we got a better view of it. So this is Midian right here. And so Moses was in Egypt, and he ran away to Midian. And then it is there we hear about a burning bush and the command that Moses is to return to his people and that he is going to lead them out of Egypt. He leads them out of Egypt into the wilderness. So we have the episode of the crossing of the Red Sea and so on and so on. And he leads them into the wilderness where they're fed by manna and they're accompanied by the pillar of fire. Pillar of fire during the day or during the night, pillar of cloud during the day that leads them into the desert. They are led to a place that's called Rephidim, where they have the water and the rock episode. After this, they encounter God at Mount Sinai. Now, our tradition puts Mount Sinai down here at the bottom of the Sinai Peninsula, but many scripture scholars believe that Mount Sinai was over here in Midian, and some scholars believe that they were up here, that Mount Sinai was up here in Kadesh. And so you have different traditions, but the strongest, the liveliest tradition is the lower Sinai Peninsula. And that's where our tradition has honored the site. And the site, there's a monastery on the mountain, and people climb the mountain and see where, it's not the highest peak ever. It's, just a mountain at the southern end of the desert there. So he leads them to the foot of the mountain there in chapter 19. So keep in mind, chapter 19, they're told to prepare themselves for God's encounter with them. Moses gets the people ready to hear from God, and Moses is summoned up the mountain alone. And he is up on the mountain with God for 40 days and 40 nights, and he receives these commands. So we are in the part where Moses is receiving God's commands. And it will continue. These commands of God will dribble out and continue to multiply as the text goes on. So, but we're in 22. And 22 is really about how do we live together? How do we as Israelites, as the people of God, live together? What do we need to do to make sure that our lives together are harmonious? Because, we just came from Egypt. We're all, from different experiences and different lives. How do we come together as God's people? And so God's law is seen as a gift to God's people to help organize them and help bring them together so that they can be his community. So, chapter 22 is part of this legislation. All right, are you there? You shall not oppress or afflict a resident alien. For you were once aliens, residing in the land of Egypt. Okay, it's recent history. You shall not wrong any widow or orphan. If ever you wrong them, they cry out to me. I will surely listen to their cry. My wrath will flare up, and I will kill you with the sword, and then your own wives will be widows, and your children orphans. What's wrong? You don't like hearing the word kill.
You're right, yeah. It's hard to think about how mean and bad people can be. Yeah.
It's God.
God. Oh, it's God.
It's how mean and bad God can be.
I thought he was talking about people.
No. What he is inferring here is, and he said, if you don't take care of the widows and orphans, I'll make sure that your greatest warriors and heroes and soldiers will be cut down. It will be the wars that they enter into that will leave them widows and orphans. Right? So it's not like God is coming with a flaming sword, hacking people apart.
I didn't mean that when I said that. I'm sorry.
What?
God is still allowing it, though.
God is allowing it, and as He always has. If we want to perpetrate that kind of violence against one another, that's our decision. So, all right, keep going. No, I finished it, didn't I? Yeah, I did. Okay, so what's the thing about orphans and widows? Why? There are different places in the Old Testament that orphans and widows are specifically named as this particular group of people that need special protection. Any thought?
Because they had nothing. They had not presence, but authority within the community. They were the least.
Where did the authority in the community reside?
The fathers, the men.
Okay, so that's very important to understand. Fathers were the authorities of the community. And so if a child was without a father and there was no man to step in and to help him form his life, this was an orphan. He was orphaned and his mother was a widow. So in this context, the only real clout you had in society was the guy who led your family unit, the guy who was, head of the extended household, the father of all. So if there was no father, there was no hope for those children and that wife. Okay? Women didn't have a voice, nor did children. So therefore, it wasn't until a boy made his bar mitzvah when he was 12 or 13 that they actually recognized him as a man and having a voice. But anything under that age was extremely vulnerable. So, three groups. Aliens. Why aliens?
Because they had no rights within the community.
Okay. Aliens had no rights within the Israeli community, and so there had to be special conditions for their care. Now, who were these aliens?
Travelers.
Not temporary travelers, no.
Refugees.
They could be refugees.
They'd be slaves.
They could be slaves. Okay? So the Israelites were not above taking slaves, as every ancient people did. So you had slavery. You had people who had were lost their place in their own people. You had people who were married into the tribe, and so these people who had dependence upon the male were as likely as widows and orphans to suffer from neglect, especially if they didn't have their patron, So the aliens in your midst are a vulnerable people. And so this is the sign of your greatness. Okay? This is the sign of your being one with God, is that you have this love for and a willingness to care for those who have nothing. That is kind of the core concept of what it means to be a community that cares for each other. We look out for and protect those who are the most vulnerable among us.
Were they non-Jews?
Who? Aliens?
Were they?
Aliens were non-Jews. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay? Why is this reading commended to us today?
Who is your neighbor?
Okay, and therefore, what are we to learn?
That we are to love our neighbor and take care of them.
Okay, and especially the neighbor who is vulnerable. Okay, yeah. Okay.
Who is not a neighbor in the traditional sense.
Uh,
That there are, yeah, they're not our kinsfolk.
they're not our kin, but now neighbor has been expanded. Yeah. All right. Let's take a look at Thessalonians then. Okay. Everyone knows where Thessalonica is, right? Greece. Okay. Let's do a little reminder here of some of these things. All right. First of all, we want to recognize Macedonia is the northern part of Greece. Macedonia. Okay? Achaia is the southern part of Greece. All right? You're going to hear those in the letter today. So I want you to be very clear about where those land masses are. Okay? And Paul has made a trip from Pisidia to Troas, and from Troas he has a vision of a man asking him to come to Europe. So he crosses over to Philippi, moves on to Thessalonica, Berea, Athens, Corinth, and then back to Ephesus. Okay? So we're looking at that original journey that has brought Paul to found these communities, especially along the Adriatic there. Okay. So Thessaloniki today is the second largest city in Greece, and it was at the time as well. So it's been a large population, the whole, for historical reasons. Now, Paul is reporting or reminding the people of Thessalonica that he was kicked out of Philippi. He was actually kicked out of Thessalonica. Do you know why?
They didn't like him, I don't know.
Yeah, the Jews didn't like him.
Yeah.
The Jews didn't like what he was saying in their synagogue, and so they kicked him out of Thessalonica as well. So he's going to remind you of that. So, 5c in chapter 1. You know what kind of men we proved to be among you for your sake. And you became imitators of us and of the Lord. This imitation concept is called, the Greek word is mimetes. 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 And it is used by Paul 4 times in his letters as a particular device that calls people to holiness. The device is basically, I imitate Christ, you imitate me. Then you become Christ. Okay? So if I imitate Christ, I lead you, you imitate me, you become the person of Christ, and other people see you and recognize that you are something different. Okay? So that's what he wants to kind of remind the Thessalonians. Remember, this is his first letter. And so this is the first time he's going to bring this idea up, but it'll also come up in Corinthians, and it'll also come up in Philippians, and it'll also come up a second time in Corinthians as well. So imitation. All right. And you became imitators of us and of the Lord. For you received the word. Do you have the word? Mm-hmm. Okay, the word means the whole gospel. Okay? You received the gospel, and you received it in affliction. Do you have affliction? Mm-hmm. In what?
Great affliction.
Great affliction. Anyone have something different?
Great opposition.
Great opposition. Anyone else? Okay, so what Paul is recalling for them is that when they accepted his gospel, they had to suffer for it. And how did they suffer? They were rejected by their neighbors. They were rejected by their fellow Jews. They had limited opportunities at times because the culture would say, no, you don't get this because you're not part of us. And so they had to deal with the friction that comes from believing in a culture, in a massive culture that was pagan and that didn't like people who believed differently. And so, therefore, suffering was necessarily a part of their experience in terms of accepting the gospel. Okay? So, you received the word, meaning that word was delivered to you. You opened your heart to it with much affliction and with joy, inspired by the Holy Spirit. So, even though you had embraced affliction, at the core of this whole experience was this knowledge that you were saved. Okay. So that you became an example to all the believers in Macedonia and Achaia. Okay? So again, Macedonia is basically what Paul is referring to, is these communities that he founded along this Macedonian coast, and then Corinth and Athens down here, where there was also established in Athens a small, it says small group of believers. Corinth, a much more vibrant, healthy community of believers. So that everyone has now heard how the Thessalonians have accepted the gospel even in the face of persecution and difficulty, which was not the case so much in Corinth, let's say, because Corinth was used to a polytheistic kind of world. But in Thessalonica, it was different. Okay, but your faith in God has gone forth everywhere, so that we do not need to say anything. For they themselves report concerning us what a welcome we had among you. For they themselves report concerning us what a welcome we had among you, and how you turned to God from idols. And here it doesn't necessarily mean statues of false gods. It means anything that served as a false god. Okay? Idolatry. You turn from idolatry to serve a living and true God. Those living and true is like to counter the idea of an idol, which is dead and untrue. So our God is living and true. Those gods are dead and untrue. Okay?
There's more than one God in this belief?
Yes.
Really?
There were many gods.
I
You know Greek mythology,
Yeah,
right?
okay, yeah.
Greek mythology is many gods. You know?
I didn't
And
know,
so-
I didn't know that. I thought
Oh,
was-
there you go.
I always think there's one God. Yeah.
There is only one God.
Yeah, okay.
For not only, I said that already, sounded forth from you in Macedonia and Achaia, but your faith in God has gone forth everywhere, so that we need not say anything. For they themselves report concerning us what a welcome we had among you, and how you turned from the living God, and to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, Jesus, who delivers us from the wrath to come. What's the wrath to come? What is he talking about, this wrath to come?
It feels like present day.
What?
Wrath feels like present day. Lately.
Oh, okay. All right. It's the wrath of 2023.
The second
The wrath
coming.
to come.
The second coming of Christ.
How is that wrath? Wrath
says
is
it's going to be the
excessive anger.
The great and terrible day of the Lord.
Wrath. Thought he was going to come with love. Enduring love.
Tell me.
Wrath. Okay, remember, well, it's been a long time since I've talked about the day of the Lord. So maybe some of you won't remember. Maybe none of you will remember.
So tell us.
The concept arose in the latter prophets of the Old Testament. A concept arose that the earth was just so far gone and so sinful that the only thing God could do would to be destroy it and begin over again. Okay? This concept of a day of the Lord would be a day of judgment, where God would come and kind of declare who was just and who was unjust, and all the parts of society that had been part of this justice and injustice. And in all the world, all of this would be revealed by God, who then would burn everything up and start over. And so this idea of the day of the Lord was a day of judgment, a day of the Old Testament, God's kind of rectifying the situation that men had destroyed. As that concept developed, it got twinned with the idea of Jesus' return. So Jesus clearly predicted that he would come again. What that meant to people was not very clear. And so for some, like in the Gospel of John, the fact that he came again already happened. It happened because once he was resurrected, he came into his disciples again. That's the second coming. But in the other Gospels, there seems to be a combination of this idea of the great day of the Lord in which judgment would come, and the return of the Son of Man on the clouds, one like a son of David, coming on the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man, coming on the clouds of heaven, and he will bring justice and judgment to the world. So this concept from Daniel 7 is twinned with this announcement of Jesus coming again, leading us to an end of the world scenario that includes fire, or what's called the parasmos, the fiery furnace that will bring God's justice and God's authority back to the earth. Did you have a question?
No, stretching.
You were stretching. Oh, okay.
Shovel's getting a little heavy.
Yeah. Okay. Who asked that question? Nobody asked a question, and I just spouted off for a 5-minute.
No.
I mean, doesn't Jesus himself refer to a day of judgment? He talks about separating the goats from the sheep.
Yeah.
And then
But there's no fire in that story.
he's kitchen the fire a few times, burning it, getting it out.
Yeah, okay. Granted. What do you think of that?
I think Jesus tied it to himself at that point.
Okay.
To me, it did.
That's fair. I mean, it's fair to say that Jesus connected himself with that. It could be a story that circulated in another context where Matthew put it as a last judgment scene. You see, it could have been a story that Jesus told about traveling around Israel. And some are on my left and some are on my right, like a sheep who separates. But Matthew heard the story and applied it to the end times. So, do you see what I'm saying?
But I'm not necessarily in agreement.
Oh, I see that. I see.
I guess as a lot of Catholics, I kind of work through that concept of the day of judgment and
Some of them, yeah, the evangelicals especially.
And so, as a Catholic, you kind of struggle with it a little bit, but boy, Advent brings it smack dab right in the middle.
Well, you know, the concept is really important, I think, for us, and that's in the sense that there will come a day when this will end. And in the ending, there will be some kind of a judgment. There will be some kind of sorting through. There has to be some kind of rectifying judgment on the world, etc., etc. How that is manifested is colorful, you know, and different ways that it's expressed in the scriptures. Just point to the fact that we don't know how to talk about this. And we don't have the exact right information. We have suggestions and concepts and images and that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
It does, and for me as a Catholic Christian, the way I look at it is every single one of us has a life that is going to end at some point.
Right?
And so it doesn't matter if I'm here at the last, you know, what could be the last judgment or whatever it is, my life's gonna end at some point.
Yeah, but it's not just about you. It's about all of history.
Yeah, everyone's life, but I mean.
But it's about, I mean, you are going to want to see, or you're going to want to know or understand what happened to Putin.
Well, yes.
I mean, as human beings, we want to understand, how did these things happen the way they happen, and who are these people in relationship to God? You know, and that's the judgment. That's the clarification. That's the end times scenario that we hope to give us some clarity about the way the world is. So, yeah.
Sometimes I think each of us would probably go to God, before God at the end of our lives, and have a list of questions. You know, could you explain this? Could you explain that?
He'll have a list of questions too. Why did you do that? What did you mean by this?
But then I wonder, when we're in the presence of God at the end of our life, will we really care about all those questions that we had anymore?
You will have an awareness of things that you have not now.
So it's not necessarily going with a question answer.
That's right.
Awareness.
It'll become clear to you what this is all about. All right, I gotta go.
Oh, darn.
Bathroom's down here.
Thank you, Father.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Father, are we going to have a new heavens and a new earth? Is that also looked at?
Yes, that's part of our belief,
What is
that
it?
there is a new heaven and a new earth. But what does that mean?
I don't know.
We don't know.